Welcome to the Future of Surrogacy, the podcast that explores the people, the innovations, and the ideas building the next generation of surrogacy.
Today, we're diving into a topic that has generated a lot of conversation, concern, and advocacy throughout the surrogacy community over the past several months. Proposed legislation in Florida that many believe could have a significant impact on the future of surrogacy in the state. To help us understand what happened, why it happened, and what it means moving forward, I'm joined by Karen Persis. And how cool is it that you're an attorney and your last name is Persis, and this whole idea about she persisted? That's so cool. So Karen is a highly respected reproductive technology attorney based in Florida and the founder of Karen Persis PA. For more than 13 years, she has represented intended parents, surrogates, and donors in matters involving assisted reproduction, surrogacy, gamete donation, adoption, and parentage. She is widely recognized as one of the leading voices in reproductive law and recently has been one of the attorneys helping lead opposition efforts in Florida. Today, we're going to talk about what's going on, how the surrogacy community responded, where things stand, and what lessons the broader family building community should take away from this experience. And I should say that I had the fortunate experience of sitting next to Karen at a morning breakfast at the Seeds conference. And I'm hoping that this podcast is as impactful as that breakfast was, because for anybody that has spent 10 minutes with Karen, you're like, oh my gosh, she is awesome. So with that, welcome to the Future of Surrogacy, Karen.
Thank you so much.
Let's start with a broad overview. In layman's terms, what's going on? What was proposed? What's happening?
Sure. So in January, literally the last day that a bill could be proposed in our legislative session, and the last minute, right at 6 o'clock, this House bill and Senate bill, companion bills, come in with regard to just a huge overhaul of our surrogacy and what we also refer to as our pre-planned adoption statutes. Pre-planned adoption is another mechanism that we use for surrogacy. There were some attorneys that were aware of the possibility of some legislation occurring, but nobody really knew what exactly it was going to look like, if it was going to happen. And really, it just came in so late, right at the end. It was definitely a very big surprise because we really haven't had any edits to these laws for decades. Florida was actually an early adopter of reproductive technology laws in the late 90s. So where you're seeing some states now, like New York or Michigan, places that are just now putting surrogacy statutes on the books in the past 5-6 years, we've been doing this for quite a while. And we really hadn't heard, a lot of rumblings from a legislative perspective on our statutes. We haven't had any kind of headline case up to that point, about surrogacy. So it took me off guard and definitely changed the trajectory of my 2026 for sure, like straight out of the gate, right, early January.
Wait, I've got a question. So saying that it came in last day, last minute, can we insinuate someone was trying to sneak it through under the radar?
It certainly wasn't a sneak because once you do it, everybody's going to be aware of it. But I don't know if they were trying to do rewrites on it up until the last minute. Maybe somebody had second thoughts on proposing it the way that it was written, and then they decided to submit it anyway. I have no idea what the reasoning was to submit it so late, very last minute. Certainly, there could be the argument made that there wasn't any time for anybody to really look at it in advance because it was submitted so late. But that's the way that it came in.
Okay, so what's in the bills? What's the
Right.
overview on what they say?
Yeah. So the bills, they're companion bills, so they were the exact same language. And basically how it was couched is this way of protecting surrogates or protecting this process. But really what it did is it overhauled it in a way that basically made it impossible to engage in surrogacy in Florida unless you were the narrowest set of circumstances, which is a married man and woman who both are genetically related to the child. Meaning you couldn't have somebody that used an egg donor, you couldn't have somebody that used a sperm donor, and you couldn't have anybody that used donated embryos either, which are all three
Wow.
components in reproductive technology that I see regularly. So it made it incredibly narrow, which basically felt like it was a kill bill group. And then there were a lot of additional barriers that were put in place with the way the law was written such that it would make it really impossible for anybody to engage in surrogacy with regard to how the bill was written initially. Now, that's how the bill was written initially and what we ended up with are two different things, but that is how it started out. And unfortunately, legislators, when they filed it, they didn't talk to any of us about it. Now, I was fortunate to be at a 15-minute meeting with the House sponsor of the bill. She took a lot of notes and was interested in the things that I had to say. We didn't have so much luck on the Senate side. But of course, we would want to be involved in those conversations because it's a very small group of legal professionals that practice in this area. Well, we've got over 100,000 lawyers in the state of Florida, and I could count on my hands and toes how many of us do this. So we're a very small group. We're small but mighty, and we really did, and we still do welcome any conversations with our legislators so that they can talk to us and we can talk to them about what's really happening in this industry so that we can create legislation, in the future that would be comprehensive.
So did you get a sense of what would be the motivations for this narrowing
Right.
of people that can participate?
Well, by saying it's got to be a married man and woman and not budging on that, I think it's obviously very clear that they don't want our gay families engaging in surrogacy. I don't see
Mhm.
how you could read it any other way. It's also restricting the ability for single people to engage in surrogacy.
Hmm.
More and more we're seeing a growing population of women who are professionals. They work, they have very full lives, but maybe they don't have a partner or a spouse and they get to a point where they're like, hey, I want to have a family, but it may not work for them. Just because you're a woman, it doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to be able to bear a child. There's single women need surrogates. I have a number of single women every year that engage in surrogates. This would prevent them from having this family. It would also prevent unmarried couples.
And medical conditions. Like I have friends that went through cancer without time to collect any egg or sperm. But for LGBTQ plus population, that feels politically or religiously motivated.
Yeah, there were a number of unfortunate circumstances that happened for the past year. I think we're all very aware of the Wall Street Journal article about the Chinese couples. There's a Russian guy too that he's created all these kids via surrogacy all over the place.
Yep.
There's concerns with abuse with these certain circumstances that made headlines. And absolutely, I don't want things like that happening either. I think that
No.
was also motivation. There was a headline of some man in Pennsylvania who had been convicted. He was a pedophile, and he was able to have a child via surrogacy.
Yeah.
Nobody wants that. And there were certainly things in this legislation that also addressed some of those concerns too. So not everything in it was bad. I think, there's potentially some part of this that came from a good place and that there should be some more protections. But this was not necessarily the way to go about it, in
Yeah.
my
Okay.
opinion.
So tell us kind of where do they stand now?
What ended up happening was we learned a lot about this legislative process and we hired a group of lobbyists and they helped us as well. But your bill has to go through committee hearings before it ever can really be voted on. But we didn't even have a committee hearing in any of the committees it was assigned to. And then at the last minute, there was language regarding surrogacy that was basically attached as an amendment to a foreign influence bill, which, of course, there were members in the House and the Senate that said, hey, this is not germane. This doesn't make any sense with regard to the rest of this bill, which was about foreign influence and all these different things. But what the amendment said was, well, there was two different bills. There was the House and the Senate. The House was basically just, we don't want citizens of foreign countries of concern to partake in surrogacy in Florida. The Senate bill or the Senate amendment went further in that it restricted anybody who didn't live in Florida from engaging in surrogacy. Now, that was a big problem because that meant, for example, if the intended parents lived in Georgia and the intended mom's sister lived in Florida and wanted to carry for her, they could not engage in surrogacy in Florida because the intended parents lived in Georgia. That was way overreaching and didn't make a lot of practical sense.
Right.
And so,
That's such an eye roll in terms of like, why are you
yeah.
making legislation where you don't fully understand how it works?
Well, and that's what became very clear, during this amendment process
Yes.
where there was discussion. And it was very obvious that nobody understood what surrogacy was. And I'm
Right.
not saying that as a dig to any of our legislators. It's a very narrow, micro niche area, right? I mean, I don't expect anybody to understand the inner workings of what I do, but I'm here to happily explain it to anybody that
Yeah.
wants to listen to me. And I want to have those conversations with people. But even the legislators that were supporting, our position, it was clear that they just didn't have a full grasp of surrogacy. And quite honestly, they didn't have any time to learn about it either because this thing basically lay dormant to the very end and then just got strapped in as an amendment to another bill. And so it kind of just took everybody off guard. And there wasn't really time for education at that point. We're
Yeah.
trying to get the information out as quickly as possible. But I mean, it really takes like, hey, let's go sit down for a cup of coffee. And let me explain this. And I know you're going to have 10 follow-up questions to everything that I say. And I expect it because it's a very small area of law.
Yeah, but you can't say it because you work with these people, but I can say it. You're making sweeping legislation without all the information. How is that anything but irresponsible?
It's I agree. And on both sides, in the Senate and the House, there was a legislator in each chamber that literally said, like, hey, have you talked to any of the lawyers that do this? And both times they're like, no. Just
Yeah.
no, you know, no, and not like no, but we meant to, or no, just no. And that was really disheartening because I do think that there are definitely ways that we could make more comprehensive legislation that
Yeah.
protects kids, surrogates, intended parents in Florida. I want those changes. I welcome those changes. I want to participate in those changes to make our legislation or our laws even better for everybody. But there wasn't any involvement with any of us, and it doesn't seem, at least in this structure, there wasn't any real interest in it. So what happened was that the House amendment ended up passing. So the Senate amendment that was overbroad and was saying basically if you didn't live in the state of Florida, like you couldn't do this. Um, that was removed, and everybody passed the House language. So first of all, you cannot be a citizen of our the foreign countries of concern. So and everybody's like, well, what does that mean? Well, there's a list. And so we're talking about China, Russia, Syria, Iran, uh, Korea, Cuba, and in Venezuela under Maduro,
Mm.
which I don't even really understand how you can make that determination since he's no longer in power. But in any case, so it's been limited to those people. And so I understand where the legislature is coming from in that they're afraid of certain people in these countries. There was definitely a sentiment that people from these countries were coming here and creating United States citizens because they thought they were going to be able to use them as people say anchor babies, which is not at all how immigration works. If they were doing that, it would be the longest con in the world because the kid has to be like 21 in order to sponsor somebody. So they'd have to wait all that time in order for that to actually be effective. But there was this sentiment that this is the overarching way surrogacy is being used, is that these bad people from bad countries are coming in here and creating US citizens. I don't know if they think that they're going to be some sort of spy kids or what. I really don't know. I've had clients from some of these countries. They're lovely people. I'm not saying that there aren't bad actors in these countries. There's bad actors in every country, everywhere. But that is what ended up being passed and signed by the governor. So we went from having this massive overhaul of legislation, and it comes down to very narrowly impacting these individuals. Now, but again, we're in Florida, so saying that you can't be Cuban, um, and goes for surrogates and intended parents, that's can be very impactful to people that have lived here their whole lives. So obviously, these people also these groups of folks can always have surrogates in other states. I think we're the only one currently that has legislation. Of course, that doesn't mean we will be the only ones forever. But that's how it is right now. I think we all anticipate that there will be legislation for next session in 2027. I don't think any of us think that we're done. I just hope that now that we're all aware of it, maybe in the off season, so to speak, we can work with legislators to create something that would really work for Florida families across the board. Now, I know people always ask me, okay, but like you're saying there's going to be legislation next year, but typically laws are not applied retroactively. So if you are a single woman, for example, that wants to engage in surrogacy in Florida, which you would use our pre-planned adoption statute in order to do that. And even, horror upon horrors, if next year they do pass something that prohibits single individuals from engaging in surrogacy, you will have already been grandfathered in through our existing law. If you already have a contract in place, because and again, the laws could change. What they could propose next year could be, and this is retroactive. So again, no crystal ball, can't guarantee it, but typically speaking, whenever the start date of the law would be, it would be everything from that point going forward would be impacted. Right now, this law will go into effect July 1. So that means July 1, I can't have gestational surrogacy agreements with, with citizens of China, But right now, Florida is certainly not a no-fly zone. You definitely can still engage in surrogacy here for the vast majority of cases that we have, right?
So, okay, and a green card holder is fine.
I'm not sure.
Well, you can follow up with me on that. And so you had said that other states could look to this legislation and be like, "Oh, we're gonna do the same thing."
Everybody needs to be worried if you have a conservative legislature, because whether it's through the court system or through legislation, basically they're testing this out. Everybody wants to kind of say like, oh, well, Florida's going to Florida. But the thing is that when Florida sneezes, everybody else gets the flu. We're a bellwether. And so if this works here, it is going to be cut and pasted into states that have similar composition when it comes to their state government. We are 100% a test case. It's easy to kind of just be like, well, that's Florida and I'm in Georgia and it doesn't matter. Absolutely, you should care, because if it's happening here, it can happen there. And if it is successful here, trust me, it is going to be cut and pasted everywhere else. I always say kind of, if you're a football fan, the entire Southeastern Conference, the SEC of football, all of those states would be easy impacts. And that's literally your whole southeastern part of the United States. And that's just off the top of my head. There's certainly other places that could be impacted as well. Other things that I would be concerned with is if I'm a state that doesn't have any laws, because if you're a state that doesn't have any laws and you're just basically relying on a judge previously saying that these are enforceable agreements, always entering parentage orders, but they're not doing it with any type of legislative intent. There's no law, right? And now they're seeing these headlines, they're seeing what's happening in Florida. You might have a judge in one of these states that's now saying, well, you know what? I don't have to do this, right? And then what do you do? Because you don't even have a statute. Like, at least we have statutes that guide us, guide our judges. And as long as you're following the statutes, you're good. But if you're a state that doesn't even have a statute, I'd be really concerned that this is the first legislation that's going to be presented to your state. And also that you end up having some judges that just change their mind and how they, were previously entering these orders,
And
particularly with the negative headlines.
and there's agencies that where their entire intended parent base is in China.
Yeah. People also have to remember for a long, long time in China, you could only have one kid,
Yeah.
and now we're in, a set of circumstances where that's no longer the case. And
Mhm.
so there's so many Chinese people in general. So of course there's going to be infertility. There's going to be need for surrogacy. And so yeah, they are coming here. There's always going to be some states that are going to be supportive of those types of matches, but you could end up with a lot fewer just based on how legislation unrolls in multiple states.
Yeah. Do you ever think that some of this would be like a sweeping federal change?
I think it would be too hard to do
Okay.
it that way. I mean, so much of family law, adoption, all of that is a state by state patchwork. I mean, they could pass kind of like what we did. Surrogacy can't be engaged in if you're from these foreign countries of concern. But from a real like parentage type perspective, I don't see it happening. I think it will always be a patchwork of states.
Okay, so I come from the world of adoption, and adoption is also regulated at the state level. And so there's so many adoptions that happen across state lines. And so
Huh?
a lot of times agencies would, for lack of a better term, partner
Mhm.
together, and then they would use whatever state's laws were
Yes.
more
Yeah.
advantageous.
Right.
Is that something you could would imagine would happen in surrogacy too?
I think that already happens, not necessarily advantageous, but we do see states that where people from other states will get pre-birth orders and then have them apply here in Florida, because a pre-birth order would have been permitted in their state under their framework, and then them then requesting vital statistics and just honoring their pre-birth order. So we're already seeing that, and I don't really think our legislature understands that maybe some of their concerns there's they're not maybe closing these loopholes.
Yeah, imagine there's an agency in California, and they're working with intended parents from China, but the surrogate is in Florida. Oh,
So, like, if they're doing the transfer in California, California law is gonna allow them to get a pre-birth order in California. So they're gonna use the Florida surrogate, they're gonna engage at, basically a contract in California, they're gonna get their pre-birth order in California, they're gonna submit it to Vital Statistics here in Florida. Vital Statistics here in Florida right now will issue that birth certificate. They're gonna circumvent our entire law, and
yeah.
the Chinese nationals or the Chinese citizens that you're trying to prevent from engaging in surrogacy here in Florida, they're still gonna do it. So I just wish there was some more open and comprehensive dialogue because I don't necessarily think they're getting at where they want to get at with that type of issue based on what was done.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Are there laws you're like, the laws that we actually need are blankety blank? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we do need laws that require the surrogate have an attorney, that require that she have a Florida attorney. I've seen these circumstances where they want me to do the parentage and neither attorney was a Florida attorney that drafted a Florida agreement. Now, that's a whole nother UPL and all sorts of other, issues there, but I you've gotta have at least one Florida attorney, if not, I truly believe 2. The intended parents and the surrogate should both have Florida counsel on a Florida agreement with a child that's being born in the state of Florida. I do think that there should be psychological clearance required of all the parties. I think a lot of clinics do it, but not all clinics do it.
Mhm.
And I think that that is necessary, again, not just on the surrogate, but on the intended parents as well.
Uh-huh.
I think there needs to be a requirement of escrow. I certainly don't have any issues with agencies being licensed, although I do think that we need to figure out the actual framework for how that happens. And to be honest, all of this stuff was in their legislation. It wasn't all bad. There were definitely things where you'd be like, okay, yeah, 100% I agree with that. Like, we need to do that. Here's an additional way we need to do this or that. Or we need those safeguards in place for sure. But the way that it went was that we went about it was not correct.
Yeah. And I know there are other organizations who is with you in terms of advocating that, like, hey, yes, we need laws. What we're proposing here is not right. So I know Resolve was very involved, but who else is kind of in this leading this charge in terms of opposition?
Um, we have now created an organization, because again, we were kind of caught and blindsided with all of this, but we've now created the Florida Family Building Advocates. So we are a group of Florida attorneys and other professionals that are coming together to lead the charge in fighting this legislation and also just educating people about surrogacy. Quad A was generous enough to basically allow us to, for them to serve as the client with our lobbyists until we could formally organize. We've seen a lot of support just from Quad A, from Seeds, from our surrogacy community, which we are so, so, so grateful for because we are, again, such a small but mighty group. And it is so important for us to have, everybody helping us out, lead the charge on this.
Yeah. Okay, great. And then for people that would want to get involved in terms of supporting financially or sending letters to their congresspeople or senators, how would they do that?
Follow Florida Family Building Advocates. We're going to be your central group in getting all of that information to you. We are certainly accepting donations all the time. And this helps pay for our lobbying efforts primarily. And when the time comes where we need people writing, speaking, we would be providing that information through our organization.
I'm going to ask you the final question that we ask every guest. We call this question the magic wand. So if you had a magic wand and you could change one thing or make one wish as it relates to law around surrogacy, what would it be?
It would be for all intended parents to be able to build their families through surrogacy, whether they are a straight couple, a gay couple, a married couple, an unmarried couple, or a single person, that we would afford all people the same family building options that they could have through adoption or through natural family planning or through IVF. I want all the same options available for surrogacy.
Yes. Karen, thank you so much for being here. And this law goes into effect July 1. Thank you so much for being here and sharing this.
Thank
And then how
you.
to get in touch with you if they want to learn more about you.
Yeah, calling and emailing are really the best ways. I don't have a big social media presence. I'm more of an analog person. I like to really talk to people and have this conversation.
Okay. Well, we will make sure that we'll link your email and website,
Yeah,
and also information on Florida Family
yes,
Building.
absolutely.
Builder
We have a website for Florida Family FFBA. We have a website and social media for FFBA as well.
Okay, cool. Okay, well, thank you again for being here.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
So we followed up with Karen on the green card question, and she said the only people that cannot enter into agreement are people who are citizens or residents of a foreign country of concern. If they have a green card, but they are still a citizen of a country of concern, let's say Russia, they cannot enter into an agreement, even though they live here and their whole lives are here. And she actually has a client that's going through this very scenario that cannot engage in a repeat journey, even though they all live here in Florida and had a great first journey last year. So hopefully that clarifies the green card issue. Thanks so much for listening to The Future of Surrogacy. If you liked today's episode, send it to a friend or a colleague that should hear it. And be sure to follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn to keep up with new episodes and behind-the-scenes updates. And if there's a topic you want us to cover or someone you think we should talk to, reach out. We'd love to hear from you. We'll see you next time.